22-year-old Harper Whitman sat facing attorney Richard Chen, her mind reeling from what she had just heard. Her grandfather, Thomas Whitman, had died 3 months earlier. She knew that much already. What she didn't know was that he had left her something. Not cash, not investments, nothing to help pay down her $60,000 in student loans or stretch her $340 bank balance. Instead, Thomas Whitman had left her a 200-acre cattle ranch in eastern Oregon, a property no one in the family had visited in over 10 years, a place nobody wanted. And according to Richard, a ranch now in foreclosure, with exactly 30 days before the bank seized it all. Harper stared at the stack of documents on his desk, deeds, legal notices, language she couldn't understand. "I don't get it," she finally said, shaking her head. "Why me? I hardly knew him. My mom hasn't spoken to him since I was 7. Richard adjusted his glasses, calm and professional. Without answering, he reached into a folder and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed and fragile at the edges. "Your grandfather left this for you," he said quietly. "He wanted you to have it personally." Harper took the letter, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unsteady but deliberate, written by someone aware these could be their final words. She ran her thumb over the paper's edge, her chest tightening as she read. Her breath caught because, for the first time, a man she barely knew was about to tell her the truth about who she was and why she had inherited everything. "Harper, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Richard has told you about the ranch. I know this seems insane. I know your mother probably said I was a stubborn old man who chose land over family. She wasn't entirely wrong, but I'm leaving you the Double T Ranch because you're the only one in this family who got my stubbornness without my bitterness. Your mother told me you dropped out of pre-med because you couldn't stand the idea of a life inside a hospital, that you switched to environmental science because you wanted to work with land and animals, that you became the family's black sheep by refusing the practical path. Kid, you're just like me, and maybe you'll understand why this land meant more to me than anything, why I couldn't sell it even when everyone said I should, why I'm giving you one last chance to save it before the bank takes it. The ranch is in rough shape. I haven't been able to keep it up for years. The bank wants their money. Your family will tell you to let it go, to take whatever money you can get and walk away. But Harper, there's something on that land no one knows about. Something I spent the last decade of my life protecting. Something that needs a person who cares more about doing what's right than what's easy. Go to the ranch, go to the north pasture beyond the broken windmill, then decide whether this land is worth fighting for. If you walk away, I'll understand. If you fight, I'll be proud. Either way, you're more like me than anyone else in this godforsaken family." Harper read the letter 3 times, her throat tight with emotion for a man she barely knew, yet who seemed to understand her better than her own mother. Richard watched her closely. "Your family has made it clear they want nothing to do with the ranch. Your mother, your uncle, your cousins, they've all signed papers refusing the inheritance. The ranch has liens totaling $340,000. The property might be worth $500,000 if you could find a buyer, but you can't. It's in terrible shape and in the middle of nowhere. The bank has scheduled a foreclosure auction in 29 days. Harper, I need to be honest. Taking this inheritance means taking on huge debt and a property you'll probably lose anyway." Harper looked again at her grandfather's words, his mention of something on the land that needed protection, something hidden. What had he been protecting? What was beyond the broken windmill? She made a choice her mother would call typical Harper, impulsive, emotional, impractical. "I'll take it. I want the ranch," Harper told Richard. Richard sighed but nodded. "All right, I'll prepare the paperwork." But Harper, 29 days isn't enough time to save a property this far underwater. Harper drove to eastern Oregon the next day. Her old Honda Civic was packed with everything she owned. Her student loan payment was due in 2 weeks, and she had no plan beyond going to the north pasture. The drive took 6 hours through increasingly remote country, high desert dotted with sagebrush and juniper trees, rocky outcrops under an endless sky. The Double T Ranch was 40 miles from the nearest town, at the end of a dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. When Harper finally turned onto the property, her heart sank. The ranch house was barely standing, its roof sagging, windows broken, porch collapsing. The barn was in slightly better shape but still clearly falling apart, Fences were down everywhere. Corrals stood empty and choked with weeds. This wasn't a ranch, it was the decaying remains of one, left to ruin as her grandfather grew old and sick, unable to maintain what he had built. Harper parked in front of the house and sat in her car for 10 minutes, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what she had inherited. How could anyone save this? Why had her grandfather believed she could? She pulled out her phone to call her mother to admit this was a mistake and say she was walking away. No signal, of course not. She was stranded with no phone service, no internet, no connection to the outside world. Harper got out of her car and started walking. If she was going to give up, she would at least see what her grandfather wanted her to see first. She found the broken windmill easily, its twisted metal blades visible from the house, one of the few structures still standing. Beyond it lay the north pasture. Harper climbed through a broken fence to reach it. The pasture stretched for hundreds of acres, rolling hills and rocky ground covered in sagebrush and wild grasses. She walked for 15 minutes, seeing nothing but empty land, starting to think her grandfather had been delusional in his final months. Then she crested a hill and froze, her breath catching in her throat. In the valley below, gathered around a small natural spring, were horses. Not just a few, 40, maybe 50 horses. Mustangs, judging by their wild look and wary behavior. Bays, blacks, paints, a few grays, ranging from foals to older animals. They were grazing on sparse grass, drinking from the spring, moving in loose family groups, and they were all trapped. From her higher vantage point, Harper could see the valley was almost completely surrounded by steep rocky cliffs. The only exit, a narrow canyon on the far side, had been blocked with cattle panels and fencing. Her grandfather had used the land's natural shape to create a massive corral for these horses. But why? Wild Mustangs were supposed to be on BLM land, managed by the government. What were they doing on her grandfather's ranch? Looking closer, Harper saw the horses were in trouble. They were too thin. The spring was barely flowing, likely because of the years-long drought. The grass was sparse and overgrazed. These horses were starving. Harper scrambled down into the valley, her mind racing. The horses scattered as she approached, gathering near the blocked canyon, watching her with tired eyes. She could see several were in terrible condition, ribs sharply visible, hip bones protruding, foals too small for their age. How long had they been trapped here? How long had her grandfather tried to keep them alive on his own? Harper noticed something carved into a large boulder near the spring. She moved closer and found words chiseled into the stone, her grandfather's handwriting recognizable even in rock. Wild things deserve to run free, but sometimes the free world wants them dead. Sometimes protecting means containing. Her grandfather had been protecting these horses for 8 years. Harper pulled out the letter and read it again with new understanding. Something I protected for the last decade of my life. He had been shielding a wild herd from something. But what? Harper spent 2 hours in the valley counting horses, 43 in total, including 6 foals, assessing their condition, growing desperate as she tried to understand the situation. When she climbed back out and returned to the ranch house, she found a stack of old journals in her grandfather's bedroom, decades of records about the ranch, the land, and eventually the horses. She read through the night, piecing together the story. In 2015, the Bureau of Land Management had conducted a major roundup of wild horses in the area, planning to send hundreds to long-term holding facilities, or worse. Her grandfather disagreed with the roundup, believing the horses had a right to their ancestral land, so he did something drastic. He quietly herded a family band of Mustangs onto his property, created the Valley Trap, and spent the next 8 years protecting them from discovery while feeding them, maintaining the spring, and keeping them alive. But as he grew older and sicker, he couldn't care for the herd properly. The spring was failing. He couldn't afford enough supplemental feed. The horses were slowly starving, but he couldn't release them because the BLM would round them up immediately. He couldn't ask for help because he had technically stolen government horses, so he protected them in silence, hoping someone would come after he died who could find a solution he couldn't. Harper closed the last journal and checked the calendar. 28 days until foreclosure. 43 starving horses that legally shouldn't exist. No money, no phone service, no plan. Her mother was going to kill her. The next morning, Harper drove to the nearest town, a small place called Ridgeway with 1 gas station, 1 diner, and 1 feed store. She used the diner's Wi-Fi to start researching, and what she found wasn't encouraging. The horses were almost certainly part of a BLM herd, meaning they belonged to the federal government. Harboring them without permission was illegal, but releasing them would mean they'd be rounded up and likely sent to slaughter, since BLM holding facilities were overwhelmed. Harper sat in that diner booth for 6 hours, drinking refills of bad coffee, searching for a legal solution. She called wild horse advocacy groups, BLM offices, animal sanctuaries. Everyone said the same thing. No resources, no space, no solution. One advocate, Patricia Morales from the Wild Horse Freedom Federation, was sympathetic but honest. The BLM's adoption program is backlogged for years. If you reveal where these horses are, they'll be seized, and most will end up in kill pens within months. But if you keep them hidden, you're committing a federal crime and feeding 43 horses through winter. You're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 minimum. I'm sorry, but there's no good option here, Patricia told Harper over the phone. Harper returned to the ranch that evening, defeated. She had $340 in her account, student loans due, no job, a crumbling ranch with 28 days until foreclosure, and 43 horses depending on her. She sat on the broken porch and cried for the first time since arriving. Overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all, her phone buzzed. She had driven high enough to catch a weak signal, a text from her mother. "Your uncle says you actually took the ranch. Harper, please tell me you're not serious. That place is worthless." Harper looked at the text, then at the land stretching in every direction, then toward the north pasture where 43 souls were trapped and starving. She thought about her grandfather spending 8 years protecting these horses in secret, sacrificing everything, including his relationship with his family. She thought about his letter saying she was like him, stubborn enough to do what was right instead of what was easy. Harper opened her phone's camera and started recording. "Hi, my name is Harper Whitman. 4 days ago, I inherited my grandfather's ranch in eastern Oregon. I'm 22 years old. I have student debt, no ranching experience, and the bank is foreclosing in 28 days. I probably should walk away, but I can't because on this ranch, my grandfather was protecting 43 wild mustangs that he saved from a BLM roundup 8 years ago. They're starving. I don't know if what I'm doing is legal. I don't know if I can save them. But I'm going to try," Harper said to the camera, tears streaming down her face. If anyone watching this knows about wild horse rescue, about ranch foreclosure, about how to save animals and land at the same time, please help me. If you can donate anything, $5, $10, anything, I'll use every penny for feed and veterinary care. If you know lawyers who work with wild horse issues, I need help. If you just want to share this and spread the word, please do. She posted the video to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, every platform she had, using hashtags about wild horses, ranch rescue, and Oregon. Then she set her phone down and went to check on the horses one more time before dark, not expecting anything to come from the video, just needing to do something, even if it felt futile. When Harper returned to the house 3 hours later and climbed high enough to get signal again, her phone was exploding. The video had 40,000 views. Her TikTok was flooded with comments. People were sharing the video, tagging wild horse organizations, tagging news outlets, and most incredibly, people were donating. Harper opened the GoFundMe link she'd quickly created and stared at the number. In 3 hours, complete strangers had donated nearly $13,000 to save horses they'd never meet on a ranch they'd never visit. The comments were overwhelming. People shared their own stories about wild horses. People expressed anger about BLM roundups, people who simply wanted to help. Ranchers offered advice, lawyers offered free consultation, feed stores offered discounts. Someone had tagged the Wild Horse Freedom Federation. And Patricia Morales had commented, "I stand with Harper." Harper sat on the porch and sobbed, but this time from hope, not despair. She wasn't alone. The internet had shown up. Strangers believed in her. Maybe, just maybe, she could save her grandfather's legacy. Over the next week, Harper worked 18-hour days. Donations kept growing, $50,000, then $80,000, then $100,000. Major news outlets picked up the story. Wild horse advocacy groups rallied around her case. Crucially, several lawyers specializing in wild horse law reached out offering help. the legal situation was complex. The horses were almost certainly BLM Mustangs, meaning they were federal property. But they had been on private land for 8 years, which complicated ownership, and public pressure was building. Tens of thousands of people following Harper's social media were demanding the horses not be seized. The BLM found themselves in a public relations nightmare, with hashtags like Save Harper's Horses and Let Them Stay Free trending nationally. Harper hired a team of 3 pro bono lawyers specializing in wild horse issues, and they crafted a proposal. Harper would officially adopt all 43 horses through the BLM's Wild Horse Adoption Program, paying the standard fee of $125 per horse. In exchange, the BLM would drop any potential charges for her grandfather's actions. The horses would legally become Harper's property, allowed to remain on the ranch as a private wild horse sanctuary. It took 10 days of negotiation, but the BLM agreed. The story was too public, the outcry too loud for them to handle it differently. On day 15 of Harper's 29-day deadline, she officially became the legal owner of 43 wild Mustangs. But she still had to save the ranch. The $140,000 in donations was enough to feed the horses, repair critical infrastructure, and pay for veterinary care, but it didn't touch the $340,000 debt to the bank. Harper was still losing the ranch in 14 days unless she could pay off the lions or convince the bank to restructure the debt. That's when the second viral wave hit. Harper posted an update video showing the horses, explaining the bank's situation, and honestly saying she didn't know if she could save the ranch, even though she'd saved the horses. The video was viewed 2 million times in 48 hours. People started a second fundraiser specifically for the ranch debt. Donors who had already given donated again. The wild horse advocacy community mobilized. Major donors stepped forward. A philanthropist who had made his fortune in tech and loved wild horses donated $50,000 in one transaction. Within 6 days, the fundraiser had raised $380,000, enough to pay off the entire debt, with money left over for repairs. On day 27 of her 29-day deadline, Harper walked into the bank in Ridgeway and paid off the full $340,000 lay-in. The bank manager, who had been expecting foreclosure, stared at the wire transfer confirmation in disbelief. "Miss Whitman, I have to say, when you took on this property, I thought you were crazy. I've worked in banking for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this," the banker told Harper, shaking his head in amazement. "My grandfather was crazy, too," Harper replied, smiling. Word spread through Harper's family within hours. Her uncle called, suddenly interested in congratulating her. Her cousins, who had refused the inheritance, sent messages saying they'd always known she could do it. Her mother called and cried on the phone. "Harper, I'm sorry I told you to walk away. I'm sorry I kept you from knowing your grandfather. I was angry at him for choosing that ranch over us. But maybe I never understood that he wasn't choosing the ranch. He was choosing to protect something that couldn't protect itself. You're just like him, stubborn and impossible in doing what's right even when everyone says it's wrong. I'm proud of you," Harper's mother, Jennifer, said through tears. 6 months after inheriting the Double T Ranch, Harper stood in the north pasture, watching the Mustang herd graze. The spring had been repaired and strengthened, now flowing reliably. The valley had been transformed into a proper sanctuary with multiple water sources, feeding stations for harsh weather, and careful grazing management. The horses were healthy again, coats shining, ribs no longer visible, foals growing strong. The ranch itself was being slowly rebuilt. The house had a new roof, the barn was repaired, fences were being replaced section by section. Harper had hired 2 employees, local ranchers who had shown up offering help and stayed because they believed in what Harper was building. More than that, Harper had turned the Double T into an educational sanctuary. She gave tours to school groups, teaching kids about wild horses, land management, and conservation. She worked with wild horse advocacy groups, providing a model for private sanctuary alternatives to government holding facilities. She had been featured in documentaries, written articles, and become a voice for wild horse protection. "Your grandfather would be proud," Patricia Morales said, visiting the ranch for the first time. The advocate had become a friend and mentor over the past months. He protected them in secret, you protected them in public. Harper looked at the herd, at the land her grandfather had loved enough to sacrifice everything for, at the legacy she had almost refused. I was so angry at him at first for leaving me this impossible situation, for putting this burden on me. But now I understand. He didn't leave me a burden, he left me a purpose. He left me something worth fighting for, and he trusted me to be stubborn enough to fight when everyone said to quit, Harper reflected. That evening, Harper returned to the boulder where her grandfather had carved his message. She brought tools and carefully, lovingly added her own words beneath his. You were right, Grandpa. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. The wild things are safe now. Thank you for trusting me. A year after inheriting the ranch, Harper hosted a memorial service for her grandfather. The family came, her mother, uncle, cousins, relatives she had never met. They stood in the north pasture, looking at the healthy herd, the thriving sanctuary, what Harper had built from what everyone else had seen as worthless. Harper's uncle approached her after the service, looking uncomfortable. Harper, I need to apologize. When Dad left you the ranch, I thought it was senile rambling. I thought he was punishing us by giving you an impossible situation. I was angry, but now I see he knew exactly what he was doing. He gave this to you because you were the only one who would fight for it. You're more his heir than any of us ever were, Harper's uncle admitted. He left all of us something, Harper replied, gesturing at the land. He left us a lesson about what matters, about fighting for what's right instead of what's easy. You can visit any time, Uncle Mark. 2 years after the viral video that had saved everything, Harper sat on her newly rebuilt porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors her grandfather had watched for 70 years. The ranch was profitable now, sustainable through a combination of tour, educational programs, grants from conservation organizations, and continued donations from people who had followed her story. More importantly, Harper was happy. She had found her purpose, not in the career her family had wanted for her, but in the legacy her grandfather had trusted her to protect. She had gone from a lost 22-year-old with debt and no direction to a 24-year-old running a successful wild horse sanctuary that had become a national model for private conservation. Her phone buzzed. Signal was still spotty, but better since she had invested in a signal booster. A message from a wild horse advocacy organization. Harper, there's a similar situation developing in Wyoming. Family ranch, hidden horses, foreclosure coming. The rancher's grandson is scared to fight. Can we give him your number? Harper smiled and typed back, of course. Tell him what my grandfather told me. If you walk away, no one will blame you. If you fight, you'll change everything. She looked toward the north pasture, where 43 horses that shouldn't have survived were not just surviving, but thriving. She thought about her grandfather, who had protected them in secret for 8 years. She thought about the hundreds of thousands of strangers who donated, shared, and believed in one 22-year-old's impossible fight. And she thought about all the other impossible things in the world waiting for someone stubborn enough to try. If this story moved you, share it with someone facing their own impossible situation. Subscribe for more stories proving that fighting for what's right, even when everyone says it's hopeless, can change everything. And if you're standing at your own crossroads, deciding between easy and right, remember the legacy you leave isn't in what you inherited, it's in what you protected. Until next time, remember, impossible just means nobody's been stubborn enough yet. Be stubborn. The wild things need you. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, there are plenty more waiting for you. Just click on one of the videos on your screen right now. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss our next upload. See you in the next one.